They called him a hero in 1944. In 2023, his grandson thought he was just a mechanic. But when Jimmy found that trunk in the attic, everything changed. This is the story of a promise that echoed through 60 years of silence, and why some secrets are too sacred to share. What you're about to discover will destroy everything you thought you knew about war heroes, family secrets, and promises that echo through 60 years of silence. The knock came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Jimmy Morrison stood on his grandfather's porch, 19 years old and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. In his hand was a manila envelope that would shatter 60 years of lies. "Grandpa, I did it. I enlisted. Air Force, I'm going to be a pilot. Just like you were. Just like you were." Frank Morrison's coffee mug hit the kitchen floor, exploded into pieces. "No." The word came out like a scream trapped in a whisper. "Jimmy, no, you can't fly. Promise me you won't fly." But Jimmy didn't understand. And Frank Morrison would rather die than explain why. What happened next would change everything. But first, you need to understand what Frank Morrison had been hiding in his kitchen drawer for 40 years. Jimmy's grin died. He'd expected pride, maybe concern about military life, not this bone-deep terror. "Grandpa, what's wrong? You were in the Air Force. Mom always said you worked on planes during the war." "I was a mechanic," Frank said. "Too fast, too desperate. I fixed planes on the ground. I never flew." Lie number one. If Jimmy had looked closer, he might have seen his grandfather's hands shaking, might have noticed the way Frank's eyes went dead when he said the word fly. But Jimmy was 19 and believed in heroes. He didn't know that sometimes heroes carry secrets that can kill them. That night, Frank Morrison sat alone, staring at a locked drawer he hadn't opened since 1944. Inside were things that belonged to a dead man, a promise that had nearly destroyed him, and a photograph that explained everything. But he didn't know that in 7 days, his grandson would find that drawer, would discover the truth Frank had died protecting. Frank Morrison died exactly 1 week later. Heart attack, quick and quiet, the way he'd lived since the war. They found him in his recliner with a photograph in his lap. 2 young men in flight suits, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the sky. Jimmy had never seen the photograph before, had never heard of the red-haired boy standing next to his grandfather. The funeral was supposed to be small, family only, a quiet send-off for the old mechanic who fixed lawn mowers and never talked about the war. But as they lowered the casket, something impossible happened. Old men started arriving, dozens of them, veterans with weathered faces and careful steps. They didn't speak to the family. They just stood in silence, saluting a wooden box. One of them approached Jimmy after the service. "Your grandfather was the best damn pilot I ever saw," the stranger whispered. "Saved my life in '44, shot down 6 German fighters in 1 mission. Don't know why he never told you." Jimmy stared at the old veteran. Pilot, there had to be some mistake. But he didn't know that his mistake was about to become his obsession. 2 days later, Jimmy climbed into his grandfather's attic. The trunk was military green. Frank Morrison's name stenciled on the side in faded white letters. Inside were things that rewrote everything. A leather flight jacket, still smelling of aviation fuel and old nightmares. Combat mission reports, 47 of them, a distinguished flying cross, a silver star, and wrapped in oiled cloth like something holy, a diary. Jimmy opened to the first page. Read words that stopped his heart. March 15, 1943. "Tommy and I shipped out today. Made him a promise. If one of us doesn't make it back, the other finishes what we started. Didn't know then what that would cost. Tommy. Who was Tommy?" Jimmy flipped through months of entries about missions, about a friendship deeper than blood, until he reached the final page. April 22, 1944. "Today I kept my promise to Tommy. Flew my last mission, the one that mattered most. I will never fly again. Some promises you can only keep once." That's when Jimmy found the sealed envelope, addressed to Miss Mary Sullivan, Boston, Massachusetts. Never mailed. And suddenly, Jimmy understood why his grandfather had lied about the war. Why he'd begged him not to fly, and why some promises are too sacred to break, even if keeping them destroys you. But what Jimmy discovered in that envelope would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the kind of mission that haunts a man for 60 years. What you're about to learn will explain why Frank Morrison's final flight wasn't about winning a war. It was about keeping a promise to a dead man who trusted him with something more precious than life itself. Now you're going to meet the man who changed Frank Morrison's life forever. The train that carried Thomas Patrick Sullivan to Raft Debden arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. In March 1943, he stepped onto the platform with a duffel bag over one shoulder, a harmonica in his pocket, and a kind of grin that made strangers want to buy him a drink. 21 years old, red hair that no amount of pomade could tame, freckles scattered across his nose like constellations, and eyes the color of Irish countryside that seemed to find humor in everything, even war. But here's what you need to understand about Tommy Sullivan. He wasn't just another pilot looking for adventure. He was running toward something bigger than himself, something worth dying for. Tommy Sullivan was everything Frank Morrison wasn't. Where Frank wrote careful letters home every Sunday, Tommy spent his evenings in the local pub, buying rounds for homesick pilots and collecting their stories like treasures. Where Frank studied aircraft manuals by lamplight, Tommy played his harmonica and told jokes that made grown men forget they might die tomorrow. Where Frank prayed silently before each mission, Tommy whistled Danny Boy and acted like flying into Nazi airspace was just another day at the office. But there was something else about Tommy Sullivan that most people missed. Something Frank Morrison noticed the first time they flew together. In the cockpit of a P-51 Mustang, Tommy transformed. The joking stopped, the easy grin faded, and what emerged was a pilot with reflexes like lightning and instincts that bordered on supernatural. It was like watching a man step into his true skin. The first time Frank flew with Tommy was on a routine patrol over the English Channel. Nothing dangerous, just two new pilots learning to work together. But 20 minutes into the flight, Frank knew he was flying with someone special. Tommy didn't just fly the airplane, he became part of it. His movements were fluid, instinctive, like he'd been born with wings. When Frank banked left, Tommy was already there. When Frank climbed, Tommy matched his altitude without being asked. They moved through the sky like dancers who'd rehearsed together for years. Their commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, watched them land and knew immediately what he was seeing. Morrison, Sullivan, you're wingman now, don't screw it up. They didn't. What happened next was the kind of partnership that becomes legend in fighter squadrons. For 11 months, they flew together, 47 missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. They shot down German fighters, escorted bombers through flak storms, and brought each other home when home seemed impossible to reach. But more than that, they became brothers, not the casual brotherhood of soldiers who serve together, the deeper kind. The kind where one man knows exactly what the other is thinking without a word being spoken. Where trust isn't earned, it simply exists, like gravity. Frank learned Tommy's stories by heart during those long English nights, when the rain drummed against the barracks roof and sleep wouldn't come. Stories about growing up poor in South Boston, about his father, Patrick Sullivan, who died building the subway tunnels under the city when a cave-in crushed him and 5 other men, about his mother, Bridget, who worked 3 jobs to keep Tommy and his sister Mary in school, cleaning offices at night, washing laundry for wealthy families during the day, and taking in sewing whenever she could find it. About the day Tommy came home from school to find his mother crying over unpaid bills, and how he'd promised her then that someday he'd make enough money to take care of her properly. About Pearl Harbor, and how Tommy had enlisted the very next morning, not for glory or adventure, but because someone had to fight for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. I couldn't let other people's sons die while I stayed home safe, Tommy told Frank one night as they cleaned their flight gear. My old man died building something for this country, figured I owed it to him to help defend it. Tommy learned Frank's silences just as thoroughly. The way Frank's jaw tightened when he was worried about the next day's mission. The way he gripped the stick a little tighter when they flew over certain parts of Germany, where the flak was heaviest. The way Frank's eyes went distant sometimes, like he was already seeing the life he wanted to build after the war. They developed their own language in the air. A slight bank to the left meant watch the 6. A quick wing waggle meant all clear. A gentle climb meant follow me into hell and we'll both come out singing. But it was more than just tactical communication. They could read each other's moods, anticipate each other's moves, share thoughts without words. In combat, they moved like two halves of the same mind, each instinctively knowing where the other would be. Their fellow pilots started calling them the twins, even though they looked nothing alike. Even though Tommy was Irish fire and Frank was steady determination, because in the air, they were inseparable. And somewhere over the English Channel, between life and death and the constant roar of Merlin engines, they made a promise that would echo through 60 years of silence. It happened on their 20th mission. They were escorting B-17s back from a raid on Frankfurt when German fighters jumped them out of the sun. 12 Messerschmitts against 6 Mustangs. Not good odds. The attack came without warning. One moment they were flying peaceful escort. The next moment the sky exploded with tracer fire and the screaming whine of diving aircraft. Frank took hits in his wing, puncturing his fuel tank and sending gasoline streaming behind him in a silver trail. Tommy's engine started smoking after a cannon shell punched through his cowling. They found themselves alone, separated from the formation, limping home over the cold waters of the Channel. That's when Frank learned something about Tommy Sullivan he'd never known before. When death came calling, Tommy got calm, deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes from accepting something bigger than fear. Frank. Tommy's voice came through the radio, serious for once, no jokes, no whistling. If something happens to one of us, the other needs to finish what we started. What do you mean? I mean there are people back home counting on us. People who need to know that what we're doing here matters. My mother, my sister Mary, your family too. If I don't make it back, you have to carry that forward. And if you don't make it back, I'll do the same. Tommy, we're both going home. Promise me, Frank. Promise me that if one of us doesn't make it back, the other finishes what we started. Promise me that the people we love will know we died for something worthwhile. I promise. I promise to. They made it back to England that day. Both aircraft badly damaged but still flying. But something had changed between them. The promise hung in the air like incense, sacred and binding. Neither of them knew what that promise would cost. But Frank Morrison would spend the rest of his life finding out. The promise seemed simple enough at the time. Brothers looking after brothers. The kind of pact young men make when they're too young to understand that some promises cost everything you have and everything you are. Tommy had a sister back in Boston, Mary Sullivan, 23 years old, and beautiful in the way that made soldiers carry her photograph like a talisman. She worked as a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, tending to wounded soldiers who came home on hospital ships. Their bodies broken, but their spirits somehow still intact. She wrote Tommy letters every week. Long letters full of news about home, stories about her patients, and questions about when he was coming back. Letters that smelled faintly of lavender and hope. Tommy read those letters aloud sometimes, sharing pieces of home with pilots who hadn't heard from their families in months. Frank came to know Mary Sullivan through those letters before he ever saw her photograph. Know that she volunteered at the USO on weekends, dancing with lonely soldiers on leave. Know that she sent care packages to boys she'd never met who were fighting in the Pacific. Know that she saved every penny she could spare to buy war bonds. Know that she was the kind of woman who made men want to be better than they were. Frank, you ever been in love? Tommy asked one night as they sat in their barracks, cleaning their flight gear after a particularly rough mission over Hamburg. The kind of mission where they'd lost 2 pilots and come home with holes in their wings. Frank shook his head. There had been girls back home, but nothing serious. Nothing that felt like the kind of love worth fighting for. Well, when this war's over, you're going to meet my sister Mary, and you're going to understand why I fight so hard to get home. Tommy pulled out a photograph. Mary Sullivan smiled back at them from beneath a Boston streetlight, her dark hair catching the glow like something from a movie. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of strength, kindness, and the kind of beauty that comes from within. She's beautiful, Frank said, and meant it. She's everything good in this world. Tommy replied, everything this war is trying to destroy. When I get home, I'm going to marry her and build a life that makes all this madness worthwhile. He tucked the photograph back into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. I've already written the letter, you know, the proposal. Been carrying it around for 2 months, trying to work up the courage to mail it. Why don't you? Because what if she says no? What if I survive this war only to find out that the best thing in my life doesn't want me back? Frank studied his friend's face for the first time since he'd known him. Tommy Sullivan looked vulnerable, young, scared of something that had nothing to do with German fighters or flak. She'll say yes, Frank said quietly. Any woman would be. Lucky to have you. You think so? I know so. The way you talk about her, the way she writes to you. That's not the correspondence of a woman who's going to say no. Tommy smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Maybe you're right. Maybe when this war's over, we'll all get our happy endings. But Tommy Sullivan wasn't going home. And Frank Morrison was about to learn that some promises require you to carry another man's dreams, another man's love, another man's future. The mission briefing came at 0500 hours on April 22, 1944. The kind of morning that felt heavy with unspoken dread. Target, rail yards outside Munich. Strategic importance, critical, enemy resistance, heavy, expected losses, 30%. Frank and Tommy sat in the briefing room with 46 other pilots, drinking coffee that tasted like liquid regret and trying not to think about the mathematics of war. 30% losses meant 14 men wouldn't be coming home for dinner. The intelligence officer droned on about flak positions and fighter concentrations. The weather officer warned of possible clouds over the target. The chaplain offered a prayer for safe return. But Frank wasn't listening to any of them. He was watching Tommy, who sat perfectly still, staring at the mission map with an expression Frank had never seen before. Not fear, exactly. Something deeper. Something that looked like acceptance. Something that looked like goodbye. Tommy leaned over and whispered, "Today feels different. Different how? I don't know. Just different. Like something's waiting for us up there. Like this is the mission that's going to matter." Frank felt it too. The way the morning air seemed thicker than usual. The way his hands shook just slightly as he signed the mission roster. The way Tommy played his harmonica longer than usual before they suited up. The melody of Danny Boy floating through the ready room like a prayer. Some mornings you can taste your own mortality in the coffee. This was one of them. They walked to their aircraft in silence. To P-51 Mustangs sitting side by side on the tarmac like silver prayers. Frank's plane was named Boston Dreams after Tommy's endless stories about home. Tommy's plane was called Mary's Hope, everything they fought for, right there in the paint. As they performed their pre-flight checks, Frank noticed Tommy slip something into his jacket pocket. When he looked closer, he saw it was the proposal letter, the one Tommy had been carrying for 2 months. Planning to mail that when we get back, Frank asked. Tommy grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Figure if I survive today, it's a sign from God that I should stop being a coward. As they climbed into their cockpits, Tommy called across the narrow space between their aircraft. Frank, remember our promise. Always, Frank called back. Neither of them knew it would be the last conversation they ever had as wingmen. The last conversation they ever had as young men who believed they could both survive the war. But you're about to witness what happened next. And when you do, you'll understand why Frank Morrison never flew again, why he lied to his family for 60 years, and why his final mission wasn't about winning a war. It was about keeping a promise to a dead man who trusted him with something more precious than life itself. The skies over Munich were angry that morning. Flak burst around them like black flowers blooming in the wrong season. German fighters dove out of the sun with guns blazing, their yellow noses cutting through clouds like knives through silk. And somewhere in the chaos of war, 30,000 feet above a burning continent, Tommy Sullivan's voice crackled through Frank's radio for the last time. But first, let me tell you about the mission that changed everything. They had taken off from RAF Debden at 0630 hours, part of a massive formation heading deep into Germany. 54 P-51 Mustangs escorting 96 B-17 Flying Fortresses, all of them carrying enough explosives to level a city block. The bombers were loaded for bear. The rail yards outside Munich were critical to German supply lines and Allied intelligence had been planning this strike for months. If they could knock out those rail yards, they could slow German reinforcements heading to the Italian front. But the Germans knew they were coming. The first sign of trouble came 30 miles from the target when Frank's radio crackled with the voice of the lead bomber. Bandits. 12 o'clock high. Looks like the whole damn Luftwaffe up there. Frank squinted through his canopy and felt his blood turn to ice. The sky ahead was full of German fighters, not just a few, dozens of them, maybe more. Messerschmitt 109s diving out of the sun like silver hornets. Focke-Wulf 190s climbing from below with their radial engines screaming. Even a few of the new jet fighters that intelligence had warned them about, but none of them had ever seen. This wasn't going to be a milk run. This was going to be a war. Tommy's voice came through the radio, calm as always. "Frank, looks like we're going to earn our pay today." Frank keyed his radio. "Stay close, Tommy. We're going to need each other up here." The first attack came without warning. One moment they were flying peaceful formation. The next moment the sky exploded with tracer fire and the screaming whine of diving aircraft. Frank felt bullets punch through his wing, heard the distinctive ping of metal on metal that meant his aircraft was taking damage. He threw his Mustang into a steep climb, trying to gain altitude, trying to get above the attackers. Beside him, Tommy's aircraft rolled inverted and dove, chasing a Messerschmitt that had made the mistake of flying too close. Frank watched his wingman's guns light up, saw the German fighter disintegrate in a shower of aluminum and fire. "That's one for Mary." Tommy's voice came through the radio, and Frank could hear the grin in it despite the chaos around them. The air battle that followed was unlike anything Frank had experienced before. Fighters twisted and turned through the sky like deadly ballet dancers, leaving trails of smoke and fire. The radio filled with voices, pilots calling out targets, warning of attackers, crying for help. Frank shot down to German fighters in the first 10 minutes. Tommy got 3. They moved through the sky like they were connected by invisible wires, each man instinctively knowing where the other would be. But there were too many Germans, and not enough fuel. The bombers reached their target and dropped their loads, the explosions blossoming below like deadly flowers. Mission accomplished. Time to go home. But the Germans weren't finished with them. The second wave of fighters hit them on the way out, just as they were crossing back into Allied airspace. Fresh pilots with full fuel tanks, hungry for American blood. That's when everything went wrong. A Focke-Wulf 190 came out of nowhere, diving from the sun with all guns blazing. Frank saw it too late, was already committed to a turn that left him vulnerable. The German pilot was good, very good. His bullets walked up Frank's wing toward the cockpit with methodical precision. Frank was about to die. And then Tommy was there. Tommy threw his Mustang between Frank and the German fighter, taking the bullets that were meant for his wingman. Frank watched in horror as cannon shells punched through Tommy's engine cowling, sending oil streaming back over the canopy. "Frank, I'm hit, engines burning." The words hit Frank like physical blows. He banked hard left, pulling G's that made his vision tunnel, searching the sky until he found Tommy's P-51 trailing smoke and fire like a dying comet. How bad? Bad, real bad. Engines seized. Controls are mushy. "Listen to me, Frank. There's something you need to know." Tommy's voice was getting weaker, the kind of weak that comes when shock starts setting in, when the body begins the process of letting go. "Save it for the ground," Frank said, though they both knew there would be no ground. "Not for Tommy. We're going home together." "No, we're not, and you know it." Frank watched Tommy's aircraft shudder and drop altitude, watched pieces of aluminum skin peel away like scales, watched his best friend fighting a losing battle against gravity, time, and the inexorable mathematics of warfare. The P-51 that had been Mary's hope was dying, and so was the man who flew her. "Frank, remember our promise. If one of us doesn't make it back, the other finishes what we started." "I remember." "Good. because I need you to do something for me. Something important. Anything. In my footlocker. Back. At base, there's a letter, sealed. It's addressed to my sister Mary, but it's not the letter she's expecting. What do you mean? Tommy's laugh came through the radio, bitter and painful. The laugh of a man who's run out of time to be young. I asked her to marry me, Frank. In that letter, proposed to a girl I might never see again. Been carrying it around for 2 months. Too scared to mail it. Stupid, right? Frank's throat went tight. Jesus, Tommy. If you make it back, and I don't, I need you to deliver that letter personally. Not through the mail. Not through the Red Cross. You get yourself to Boston. You find Mary Sullivan. And you give her that letter yourself. Tommy, you're going to deliver it yourself. We're both going home. No, Frank, we're not. My engine just quit. Oil pressure's gone. I'm going down hard. Frank watched his Wingman's aircraft enter a flat spin. The Mustang tumbling through the sky like a broken bird. Watched pieces of the cowling tear away in the slipstream. Watched his best friend's aircraft disintegrate around him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Tommy said next. Frank, promise me you'll find Mary. Promise me you'll tell her what happened here. Promise me you'll make sure she knows I loved her until the very last second. I promise. And Frank. Tommy's voice was barely a whisper now, almost lost in the static and the roar of Frank's own engine. Take care of her, if she'll let you. Don't let her spend her life grieving for a dead man. Tommy, what are you saying? I'm saying marry her, you idiot. Love her. Give her the life I can't. Make sure she's happy. That's the real promise. Frank felt the world tilt sideways. Tommy wasn't just asking him to deliver a letter. He was asking him to take his place. To live the life Tommy would never have. To love the woman Tommy was dying for. Tommy, I can't do that to you. You're not doing it to me, Frank. You're doing it for me, for her, for all the dreams I'm never going to get to live. The radio crackled with static. Tommy's aircraft was spinning faster now, pieces flying off in all directions. Frank, are you listening to me? I'm listening. In the letter, I told her about you. Told her that if anything happened to me, she should find you, should let you take care of her. I've been planning this for weeks, Frank. Ever since I realized I might not make it home. You've been planning this. I've been planning to give you the best gift I could think of. The chance to love someone worth loving. The chance to build the life I always wanted, but might never get. Tommy's voice was fading now, barely audible over the static. She's going to need someone, Frank. Someone good. Someone who understands what she's lost. Someone who can love her the way she deserves to be loved. Tommy, I don't know if I can do this. You can. You have to. Because that's what wingmen do, Frank. We take care of each other, and when one of us can't complete the mission, the other one does it for him. The radio went silent. Tommy's aircraft disappeared into a cloud bank below, trailing smoke and pieces of aluminum. Frank circled once, twice, searching for a parachute that never appeared, searching for any sign that his wingman had survived. There was nothing. Frank never saw it again. Never saw his wingman again. Never heard his voice again. But he carried Tommy's final words for the rest of his life. Make sure she's happy. That's the real promise. The flight back to England was the longest 47 minutes of Frank Morrison's life. He flew alone through skies that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too silent. Every few minutes, he caught himself reaching for the radio to call Tommy's position, only to remember that Tommy was gone, that Tommy would never answer again. The other pilots in the formation gave him space. They'd all seen aircraft go down before. They knew the protocol, radio silence, let the man grieve. There would be time for talk on the ground. But Frank wasn't just grieving a friend. He was grieving a future, a life, a love that Tommy would never get to live. And he was terrified by the weight of the promise he'd just made. When he landed at RAF Debden, the ground crew could see the change in his face immediately. The way his hands shook as he climbed out of the cockpit. The way he stood staring at the empty hardstand where Tommy's aircraft should have been. The way his eyes had gone hollow, like someone had reached inside and stolen something essential. The crew chief, Sergeant Murphy, approached. Cautiously, Lieutenant Morrison, "You okay, sir?" Frank didn't answer, couldn't answer. He just stood there, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of Tommy's promise settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The commanding officer found him there 3 hours later, still standing beside his aircraft, still staring at the empty space where his wingman should have been. "Morrison, I need your report." Frank's voice was hollow when it came, empty, like the sound of wind through abandoned buildings. "Tommy Sullivan is missing in action. Last seen over Munich at approximately 11:30 hours. Aircraft severely damaged by enemy fire. No shoot observed." The words felt like glass in his throat, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Morrison, did he say anything on the radio?" Frank hesitated, then lied for the first time in his military career. "No, sir. Radio contact was lost when he took the hit. Some truths are too sacred to share with strangers. Some promises are too personal for official reports." The colonel nodded and walked away, leaving Frank alone with his grief and his secret and the weight of a promise that would define the rest of his life. That night, Frank Morrison opened Tommy Sullivan's footlocker with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like something holy, was the letter. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of paper you buy when words matter more than money. It was addressed in Tommy's careful handwriting, "Miss Mary Sullivan, 412 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts." Frank held it up to the light, wondering what words a dying man uses to propose to the woman he loves, wondering if he would have the courage to deliver them, wondering how you tell a woman that her brother died thinking of her, wondering how you tell a woman that her dead brother wants you to marry her. He spent the next 2 weeks walking around the base like a ghost. He flew missions, but his heart wasn't in it. He ate meals, but tasted nothing. He wrote reports, attended briefings, performed all the mechanical functions of a pilot at war. But inside, he was already gone. Inside, he was already planning a different kind of mission. The kind of mission that would require more courage than anything he'd ever done in combat. The kind of mission that would change 3 lives forever. 2 weeks after Tommy died, Frank Morrison requested emergency leave. When his commanding officer asked why, Frank told him the truth. "I have a promise to keep, sir." The colonel studied Frank's face for a long moment. He'd seen enough grief to recognize it. Enough good men broken by loss to know when someone needed time to heal. "How long do you need, Morrison?" "I don't know, sir. As long as it takes." The papers were processed within hours. 3 days later, Frank Morrison was on a transport ship bound for Boston, carrying nothing but his service record, a change of clothes, and a letter that would change 3 lives forever. His own, Mary Sullivan's, and the ghost of Tommy Sullivan, who had trusted him with a promise bigger than war itself. The Atlantic crossing took 9 days. 9 days of staring at gray water and grayer skies. 9 days of rehearsing what he would say to a woman he'd never met, but felt like he'd known forever. 9 days of wondering if he was brave enough to deliver another man's love. 9 days of wondering if he was strong enough to carry another man's dreams. He read Tommy's stories in his mind over and over. Mary working as a nurse. Mary writing letters every week. Mary waiting for a brother who would never come home. Mary, who had no idea that her life was about to change forever. On the 7th day of the voyage, Frank finally worked up the courage to steam open Tommy's letter. Just a corner, just enough to see a few words. "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to ask you the most important question of my life. Will you marry me when I come home?" Frank sealed the letter again, his hands shaking worse than they had since Tommy died. Some words are too sacred to read. Some love stories are too precious to steal. But now he understood what Tommy had entrusted him with. Not just a letter, not just a message, a future, a life. A love that would outlive the man who felt it. And Frank Morrison was the only person on earth who could deliver it. Boston in May of 1940 first smelled like hope and springtime, and the salt of harbor water that had seen too many ships come and go. Frank Morrison walked down Commonwealth Avenue with Tommy's letter in his jacket pocket, feeling like a man carrying another man's heart. He had rehearsed what he would say 1,000 times during the Atlantic crossing, practiced the words until they felt like prayer. Your brother loved you. Your brother died thinking of you. Your brother wanted you to have this. But when he stood outside for 112 Commonwealth Avenue, looking up at the brownstone where Mary Sullivan lived, all those practiced words evaporated like smoke. How do you tell a woman that her brother is dead? How? Do you deliver a proposal from a ghost? The building was for stories of Boston brick, with flower boxes in the windows and lace curtains that spoke of working families who cared about appearances even when money was tight. The kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's names and watched out for each other's children. Frank climbed the front steps like a man walking to his own execution. The nameplate beside the third-floor apartment read M. Sullivan in brass, letters that had been polished until they gleamed. Frank raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Once he knocked on that door, everything would change. For Mary Sullivan, for the memory of Tommy Sullivan, for Frank Morrison, who was about to deliver a promise that would define the rest of his life. He knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. Light, quick, a woman's footsteps. The door opened, and Frank Morrison found himself looking into the face of the woman Tommy Sullivan had died loving. Mary Sullivan was 23 years old and beautiful in a way that made sense of every photograph Tommy had ever shown him. Dark hair pinned back in victory rolls, eyes the color of evening sky, a nurse's uniform that was clean and pressed despite the long hours. She worked at Massachusetts General, but it was her smile that stopped Frank's heart. It was Tommy's smile, the same warmth, the same light, the same ability to make a stranger feel like family. Can I help you? She asked, and her voice carried the faint lilt of Boston Irish that Tommy had never quite lost. Miss Sullivan, Miss Mary Sullivan. Yes. My name is Frank Morrison. I served with your brother Tommy in England. The smile faltered, not disappeared, but changed, became careful, hopeful and terrified in the same breath. Is he all right? Is Tommy all right? Frank felt the words stick in his throat, felt the weight of the letter in his pocket like a stone. Miss Sullivan, may I come in? There are some things I need to tell you about your brother. She stepped aside without a word, leading him into a small but spotless apartment that spoke of a woman who took pride in what little she had. The furniture was secondhand, but well cared for. The walls were covered with photographs of family, including several of a red-haired young man in uniform. Tommy's face smiled down at them from a dozen frames. Would you like some tea? Mary asked, her voice steady, but her hands shaking slightly as she moved toward the kitchen. That would be nice. Thank you. She busied herself with cups and saucers, filling a kettle, arranging things that didn't need arranging, anything to avoid asking the question they both knew was coming. Frank sat on the small sofa and looked around the apartment. It was exactly as Tommy had described it. Clean, modest, full of love and hope and the kind of faith that keeps people going through dark times. On the mantel above the fireplace was a single photograph in a silver frame. Tommy and Mary together, both younger, both laughing. Tommy's arm around his sister's shoulders. Mary looking up at her big brother like he hung the moon. Frank understood then why Tommy had fought so hard to get home. This wasn't just a place. It was sanctuary. It was everything good in the world that war hadn't touched. The tea was ready too soon. Mary sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She had the composure of someone who had spent her career delivering bad news to families, someone who knew how to be strong when strength was required. Tell me about Tommy, she said quietly. Frank told her everything. He told her about the train arriving at Raff Debden, about Tommy's harmonica and his jokes and the way he could make homesick pilots forget their troubles. He told her about the missions they flew together, about the friendship that had grown between them, about the way Tommy spoke of her constantly, with love and pride and homesickness so deep it was like physical pain. He told her about Tommy's courage in the air, about the lives he had saved, about the respect he had earned from every pilot in the squadron. And then, when he could delay no longer, Frank told her about April 22nd, about the mission to Munich, about the German fighters diving out of the sun, about Tommy's P-51 taking fire and going down in flames. About the last words Tommy Sullivan ever spoke. Mary listened without interruption. Her face grew paler with each detail, but she never looked away, never asked him to stop. She absorbed every word like she was storing them up, hoarding the last pieces of her brother's life. When Frank finished, the apartment was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant sound of traffic on Commonwealth Avenue. Did he suffer? Mary asked finally. No, Frank lied. It was very quick. Some lies are acts of mercy. Some truths are too cruel to share. Mary nodded, tears flowing freely now but her voice still steady. He always said he wasn't afraid of dying. He was just afraid of not living first. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that had been mended several times. Thank you for coming here, for telling me in person. You didn't have to do that. Actually, I did, Frank said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Tommy asked me to deliver something to you. He pulled out the letter, cream-colored and slightly worn from the journey. Mary's name written in Tommy's careful handwriting. Mary stared at the envelope like it might bite her. What is it? I don't know, Frank said, though he did know. I promised I wouldn't read it. Mary took the letter with trembling hands, held it for a long moment without opening it. Would you mind if I read this privately? She asked. Of course not. I'll wait outside. No, please, stay. I just need a moment. Frank watched her walk to the window, where the late afternoon light made her hair shine like copper. She opened the letter carefully, as if it were made of butterfly wings. He couldn't see her face as she read, but he could see her shoulders shake, could hear the soft intake of breath that meant the words were hitting home. When she finished, she stood at the window for a long time, holding the letter against her chest. Finally, she turned back to Frank. He proposed to me, she said, her voice, wonder and heartbreak in equal measure. I figured it was something important. 3 pages asking me to marry him when he came home. 3 pages of everything he loved about me, everything he wanted us to build together. 3 pages of dreams that will never come true. She sat back down across from Frank, the letter still clutched in her hands. But that's not all he wrote. Frank waited. He wrote about you too, about how you saved his life twice over Germany, about how you were the best friend he'd ever had, about how he trusted you more than anyone in the world. Mary looked directly at Frank for the first time since reading the letter. He asked me to take care of you, Mr. Morrison. Said you'd probably blame yourself for not saving him. Said you'd carry his death like it was your fault. Frank felt his throat close up. He said to tell you that dying was his choice, that he chose to stay in formation instead of breaking off when his engine was hit, that he chose to draw the German fighters away from you, that he chose to save his wingman's life even if it cost him his own. Frank felt tears he had been holding back for weeks finally break free. Mary, I should have done something. I should have saved him. You did save him, Mr. Morrison. You saved his soul by coming here, by keeping your promise, by making sure his last words reached the person who needed to hear them most. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table between them. There's something else he wrote, something he wanted me to tell you in person. Frank waited, not trusting his voice. He said you'd probably try to disappear after this, go back to the war and get yourself killed because you thought you didn't deserve to live, when he didn't. He said I should stop you from doing that. How? By asking you to stay in Boston for a while, by asking you to help me grieve for the brother we both loved, by asking you to tell me more stories about Tommy that only you would know. Mary leaned forward, her eyes intense. He said if anything happened to him, you'd need someone to remind you that living isn't a betrayal of the dead, that the best way to honor his memory was to build the kind of life he would have wanted for himself. Frank stared at this woman who had just lost everything, but was somehow trying to save him from his own guilt. I don't know how to do that, he said. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together. And that's how Frank Morrison's real mission began. Not the 47 combat missions he flew over Nazi-occupied Europe, but the lifetime mission of keeping a promise to a dead friend. He stayed in Boston for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of walking with Mary through the public garden. 2 weeks of sharing stories about Tommy over dinner in her small apartment. 2 weeks of watching her grieve with the kind of grace that comes from a lifetime of caring for others. 2 weeks of falling in love with his dead friend's sister. He didn't plan it, didn't want it. Tried to fight it every step of the way. But love doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives like spring after winter, like hope after despair. Mary felt it too. Frank could see it in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. In the way she saved the stories he told her about Tommy, filing them away like treasures. In the way she started to smile again. Small smiles at first, then larger ones. On his last night in Boston, Frank tried to say goodbye. "I should go back to England," he said as they stood on her doorstep. "My squadron needs me, do they?" Mary asked. "Or do you need them?" Frank didn't have an answer for that. "What if you stayed?" She asked quietly. "What if you finished the war here, in Boston? There are factories that need experienced pilots to test aircraft. Ways to serve without dying." Frank shook his head. "I can't. I made a promise to come back and fight. You made a promise to Tommy to take care of me if he didn't come home. Which promise matters more?" Frank felt the weight of Tommy's words again. The real promise. Make sure she's happy. "What are you saying, Mary?" "I'm saying I think I could love you, Frank Morrison. Given time, given a chance. I'm saying maybe Tommy knew that before either of us did." She pulled out Tommy's letter, now worn soft from handling. "Listen to what he wrote at the very end, Mary. If Frank brings you this letter, it means I kept my word about coming home. I'm coming home in the heart of the best man I ever knew. Don't let him leave. Don't let him think loving you dishonors my memory. I want you both to be happy. I want you both to live the life I can't." Frank stared at the letter, reading Tommy's words through tears. "He planned this, didn't he?" Frank said. "He knew what would happen if I came here. Tommy always was too smart for his own good," Mary said, smiling through her own tears. Frank Morrison made a choice that night, a choice that would echo through 60 years of silence. He chose to stay. He chose to love. He chose to honor his friend's memory by building the life Tommy had dreamed of, but never got to live. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. No uniforms, no military honors, just a man and a woman choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story of Frank Morrison and Tommy Sullivan meant something to you, pass it on. Because some promises deserve to be remembered, some loves deserve to be honored. And some heroes deserve to have their stories told. This is Still Standing Souls. Real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.